Broadcasting from our studio in Boston, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Cloudflare in the Solutions Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solutions Spotlight featuring Cloudflare and focused on the state of VPNs and zero trust adoption. As attackers continue to exploit traditional VPNs to launch attacks, embracing a zero trust approach for your workforce becomes even more important. However, there remains much discussion in the industry about what exactly that should look like and what use cases to adopt in what order. Cloudflare commissioned Enterprise Strategy Group to survey 200 senior IT security decision makers about their approach to securing user access to corporate apps and resources, spanning traditional, digital native, and public sector organizations. This presentation contains a treasure trove of practical insights, so I will hand it over to Michael Keene from Cloudflare and John Grady, the network security analyst from Enterprise Strategy Group, to walk you through the findings of this research.
Alrighty, hey everybody, thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Michael Keene from our SASE team here at Cloudflare, joined by John Grady from Enterprise Strategy Group. And one thing we noticed at Cloudflare a few months ago is we were thinking, there's so many zero trust surveys and reports in the market and folks talking about why change from a legacy approach, but it's all kind of general. We knew there was a need to get more specific on where are folks starting with a more tangible use case, like VPN replacement being one of the most common ones. And to not just show where they're initially getting started, but what about phase 2 and phase 3 and how are organizations generally thinking about making progress on something like VPN replacement, which is such an omnipresent issue today. So we commissioned Enterprise Strategy Group to try and go out into the market and figure some of that out for us. We were really excited to see what they found. So John, I know you conducted a lot of this yourself and would love to just get your take on kicking us off with what the survey was all about.
Yeah, appreciate it. Michael, thanks for having me here. We were excited as well because I think, Cloudflare really came up with an interesting approach to this. So I've done a couple studies myself on zero trust. I cover the SASE space very closely. And I think this study was a little different than what we had done in the past. So definitely excited to kind of walk through what we found with everyone today. So just as some background, obviously this is going to be sharing a lot of data so you can understand kind of the scope of the study. We went out to 200 decision makers that were responsible for their organization's secure access technologies and policies at their organization across not only North America, but the UK as well, to really understand how they're thinking about zero trust for their workforce and ZTNA in particular. So getting into some of the findings, I think it's helpful to kind of set the foundation with what at least these organizations are seeing in terms of environmental changes. And none of this should surprise anyone on the call, but it does kind of help put into context some of the responses we'll see later on. So overall, we found that among this respondent group, 44% of their FTEs were either hybrid or remote users. And obviously, that can vary, but what we have seen is even as folks are going back in the office, obviously there's a need for consistent access as they're often still accessing corporate resources from non-office locations. And it can vary by type of organization and so on, but on the average, almost half of employees are remote at least some portion of the time. The other piece of this that gets overlooked sometimes is third-party access. So as we see more and more applications being used as part of business processes, there's more and more of a need to extend that access to all types of third parties, either contractors or temp workers, suppliers, affiliates, partners, and so on. And so among this group of the users that are accessing, again, internal apps, we're not talking about kind of public web applications like Walmart.com or anything like that, internal apps. 27% are third parties. So it's a significant part of the user base that security teams have to account for. And then finally, those types of users are often on unmanaged devices, but so are employees. And so about half of employees said they're accessing internal resources from an unmanaged device at least some of the time. So all this kind of leads to the headline that you see here is that traditional approaches really no longer pass muster, and organizations are looking for alternatives. And so fully 3/4 say that they're looking or already have reduced their dependence on hardware-based VPN with ZTNA solutions. And so the other piece of this is, the need for better integration across different parts of the environment, across IT and the network and so on. And two of the core drivers here, you can see highlighted are cloud migration and M&A activity. And these respondents really, really strongly agreed that both of these kind of changes drive the need for greater integration. So on the cloud front, obviously, as more and more organizations, not only move to the cloud, but become multi-cloud, you're dealing with, different sets of tools, different locations, different identity providers, and you need a single point of aggregation to be able to consistently provide secure access. So that's a big driver. And then M&A activity, that's not important to every organization, but it is important to a lot of organizations. And traditionally, the need to kind of manually stitch together networks takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, is extremely expensive. And back to the point about application proliferation, you really need to do that from day one. And so again, you need the ability to integrate all these different identity providers and networks to provide users access to the applications and resources they need on a much faster and consistent basis. And so strong agreement across both of these points.
Yeah, so I thought that we could just see who we have on the call here today, conduct our own mini research, so to speak, with a little poll of how far you anticipate going in your VPN replacement journey, whether you're offloading and kind of augmenting for now, whether you've already gotten started or you plan to soon, whether that's going to be a 6-month project or 6 years, or maybe you don't really ever plan on reaching 100% replacement. All of it is valid. We were curious just to hear from you directly. So have a little poll here. Let us know how far you've already come or how far you plan to go on your VPN replacement journey. And we'll see how these mini results compare to the broader survey that ESG did. So let's just give this a few seconds and allow folks to answer. Hopefully you're seeing the poll on your end, and we'll take a look at the results. I think a cool trend, though, is this acknowledgement that there could just be at a business a particular really legacy app that folks wish it wasn't the case, but maybe there's some anxiety around fully replacing that VPN. And it's generally accepted ZTNA can get you pretty close or potentially all the way in a lot of cases to replacing that VPN, that it's okay if folks don't get to 100% replacement or if it's going to take some time. But I think another really common acceptance is that there's a lot of value to get along the way to kind of start now and start the offloading, start the augmenting. So let's see. Looks like a bunch of folks have submitted. Let's see what the results say. Oh, wow. John, what's your take on these results? We take it in. Actually looks kind of close.
Looking down the list, it's actually pretty similar to what I think we saw with our results. I'll let everybody just take another moment as I'm kind of speaking to get a sense for how the group on the webinar here answered. So only 8% say they've already fully replaced their VPN. 32% will stick to specific use cases and won't replace VPN, and so that leaves about 60% in the middle. So are supporting specific use cases now and kind of planning to move towards VPN replacement, or are a good chunk of the way there, but maybe not all the way. So that's this group. And as I said, at a high level, pretty close to what we saw from our study. So, the shaded area is what I pointed to before. So 74% in the aggregate working towards VPN replacement, but they're at different stages. So among this group, only 9% said they fully replaced their VPN. So almost exactly the same as we saw just a moment ago. Fully half say that they're supporting specific use cases or applications with ZTNA now and are planning to move towards VPN replacement. And 17%, maybe most of the way there, supporting most of their remote access needs with ZTNA so they can replace their VPN. And a quarter saying supporting specific use case or apps and don't plan on replacing their VPN. And, the point that Michael made is spot on. I think some of this is perception and kind of point in time feeling. It can be, I think, hard to envision based on, years and years of using VPNs, how we can kind of move completely off of them, either based on the apps that we have in place, the users we need to support or so on. And so I do think we'll see more folks kind of shift to the right, so to speak, here over time. But it's important to kind of understand how folks are feeling now and where they are. But the main takeaway here, this is a journey. It's a work in progress, but the vast majority understand that based on those dynamics we talked about earlier, they need to find a new approach and are working to do so. And so, one of the findings in the study that really stood out was folks' feelings on agentless ZTNA and how that can help this whole process. So really, really strong agreement that it can significantly accelerate zero trust adoption. 84% agreed with that sentiment. And really strong agreement as well that agentless ZTNA can also scale to meet the needs that organizations have in terms of application and user coverage, that it provides benefits in terms of simplified deployment as well. So, from a VPN perspective, most of those solutions are agent-based. And so you have to collaborate with, IT, ops, and endpoint teams to get those agents deployed. Adds another level of complexity to the deployment process, makes it more difficult to scale out to support a number of different users, applications, and so on. So this can really be a helpful accelerator to help these projects move quicker, generate quick wins, and so on.
Jumping off that point, I think there might be a little bit of a misconception that we think of a VPN and you might think of a device agent. Because of that, anything that replaces that technology, I think it's tempting to think of a ZTNA solution in the same way, and that there's a bias towards an agent-based approach. But that can bring in more considerations, especially at first for a brand new deployment with endpoint management and how the heck are we going to get this thing to hundreds, if not thousands or more of employees, and then especially as you start thinking of folks like contractors. So I think there's a lot of value in agentless, and could argue it's even underutilized in a few cases. There's one of Cloudflare's customers that approached replacing their VPNs or a VPN alternative. ezCater is a brand that connects restaurants and caterers online to various catering opportunities. And they use a lot of Cloudflare's public-facing resource services, their web application firewall or CDN or bot management for their customer-facing apps. But back in the pandemic, they also were looking for a solution, like so many were, to accomplish their newly super distributed workforce and everyone working remote. So they looked at our ZTNA and bring in their existing single sign-on and getting a better security architecture with less of the overall complexity. And they found it really, I love this quote, it was shockingly simple to deploy because of the agentless and how much they were able to jumpstart their zero trust journey as a whole. And maybe they'll, expanding to other client-based and more advanced functionality over time as well. But getting started was so much easier, and getting some of those quick wins internally and really just help accelerate progress on that longer term journey. Other customers we've had at Cloudflare think of it kind of similarly. Another company was looking at tens of thousands of contractors that all just needed to access a timesheet app. And that was the main thing they were focused on. And agentless really helped them do that. Or some of our other customers who are mainly concerned about unmanaged devices, and especially as that pertains to contractors and partners and the data loss risk that can come with those unmanaged devices. So we see agentless coming up a lot, and I think it might even be a little underutilized. And I just want to make sure that folks know the extent of which it can really help jumpstart some of these initiatives. So John, let me hand it back to you.
I always like to highlight this, that, as you think about ZTNA adoption and ultimately that VPN replacement scenario, which sounds like just about everyone, or I should say 3/4 or so of the folks that are on the call are kind of thinking in that way, even if it's still early in the process. It still is really beneficial to do some overall planning up front to understand some of these different dynamics, right? We talked about environmental changes, and from an application perspective, we didn't dive into too much, but a lot of different applications are in use, different locations, different architectures, using different protocols, hosted on different cloud providers, so on and so forth. There's still a lot of applications on premises, not only in cloud environments. And so really understanding, what that full footprint looks like, both, in terms of private applications and SaaS applications as well, is helpful just to kind of get a baseline. That's kind of the first piece, and then understanding, the different user groups and specific individuals that have access across all those different applications, the mechanisms that are in place to secure that access currently in terms of tools, in terms of the types of devices being used, you predominantly a managed device shop or you full BYOD and so on. And then where there's gaps in that approach from a security perspective, not just kind of, we're using VPN, but do we need additional data visibility and control and so on. Doesn't mean you have to address all these points up front, and you shouldn't. But what it does do is help kind of develop a longer term vision of maybe where you want to go, what some of the goals are. So as you work towards those short term milestones, you have that longer term view, in place, and you don't get stuck, so to speak, either in terms of vendor selection or not having the capabilities that you need down the road because you were only thinking about maybe, that initial phase and so on. So, I think a lot of folks do this, maybe not, every single point, and it's really important to go through this process up front. So in terms of, and this is kind of building on the previous slide, in terms of this study, I mentioned how this was a little bit of a different research approach than we've done in the past, and I really thought it was, it was a great idea trying to break things out into phases. So we asked respondents, across a number of different aspects, kind of where they felt different portions of ZTNA adoption would fall within, phase one or an initial rollout, an expansion phase or phase two, and then advancement. And there's no hard and fast definition for any of these. The way we kind of framed it up for respondents is, the initial rollout, you're probably going to support either, a limited number of users or applications or both. You may be dealing with, a smaller feature set and not taking advantage of all the capabilities that the tool that you're deploying, has as part of its capability. But you're starting somewhat small. During the expansion phase, you're doing just that. Maybe you're, taking an application and expanding access to all users, expanding the number of applications you support, or taking advantage of additional capabilities. And then during the advancement phase, again, you just continue down that journey. It doesn't necessarily mean that at that point you are supporting all users for all apps and using all the capabilities of the tool you've deployed, but you're furthering the journey and continuing to roll things out to a broader audience and across a broader set of applications. Part of the reason I mentioned, the number of apps kind of loosely on the last slide. We have like an example list here across the types of users and the types of applications. And obviously you can't do all this at once. So this is, really the impetus for trying to think about it this way and understand where organizations are focusing at the beginning and middle and end for that matter.
I had fun last time, so let's do it one more time. Another little mini research project and see if it is similar to what we found in the real big survey. But again, so here we have various app groups and a couple examples within them. What app groups either did you already offload from your VPN, or where would you plan to start? You feel free to select more than one in this case, if you think you would also include more than one category in your initial offloading, but no perfect answer here of whether it's enterprise resource planning or IT ops or file storage and sharing. A lot of orgs start with their critical apps that they think have a lot of their sensitive data. So it would give a lot of short-term value if we locked those down first. Or internally, it could be, where do we think we have the highest chance of getting quicker wins within our ZTNA deployment? I think when you get a little bit of internal success internally, that might help you champion the project to others or to executives and get buy-in. That's something we've heard. I think quick win, that's probably a little bit of a open to interpretation in terms of what that means as well. But see, a lot of folks are submitting. We shortened it down to a few less options than the ESG survey itself, but let's give folks a few more seconds on where they think they would start offloading top apps and see if it matches the survey. We've got about 20% of folks submitting. Just give a few more seconds of whether it's, again, the riskiest apps or maybe the easiest to offload. Maybe some apps where there's fewer users overall, so that almost makes it feel easier based on where that pilot might start. Granted, some orgs might be thinking of it as top risky users rather than top risky apps, or both. I think the nice thing about this survey and this data is we're not saying one approach is totally right or wrong, but based on your individual prioritization, it's cool to at least see what the trends are saying. All right, let's go ahead and see what folks thought so far. A lot towards file storage and sharing. That makes sense, and a lot towards IT ops. John, any initial reactions to this split?
Just number one, echoing what you said, and I'll probably at least inadvertently say this a few more times throughout the presentation. There really isn't a right or wrong answer. It's going to depend on every organization, how they prioritize things, where they see their greatest risk, the most benefit from kind of moving that direction first, so on and so forth. But again, with a couple differences, this kind of aligns to what we saw, and I think we'll actually show the full list a little later on. But ERP and communication and collaboration, I think we will see on the next slide, were near the top. File storage and sharing was just behind that for us, and that was the most common here, and I think that makes a lot of sense. IT ops, I figure where that fell. That one was a little further down the list for us, but when you think about the necessity of kind of locking down, especially privileged access and things like that, that can be important as well. So this generally aligns and makes a lot of sense. So this is really a high level view of what we found, and we'll go through in more detail what different aspects of ZTNA adoption looks like across these phases. We wanted to kind of roll things up at a high level. So for phase one, you can see our respondents said that that initial rollout phase would take around 11 months. So that's an average. So some went more quickly, others it took a little longer. They indicated that on average, they'd have covered about 25% of their users and applications, which worked out to about 2 of the user groups that we specified, and just over 2 of the application types that we asked about as well. And then for that initial rollout phase, we are showing here which user groups and app types were most commonly noted kind of at the top of the list. So for user groups, it was sales, IT, and the C-suite. So there was a tie there, which is why there's 3. And then for app types, it was ERP and communication and collaboration, which, as we just saw on the previous slide, we all agreed was important as well. Phase 2, our respondents expect to take around 15 months and cover 38% of the users and apps in their organization. And you can see there's kind of a tick up in terms of the number of user groups and apps that are covered, roughly 4 across each. And the same thing in phase 3, so about 16 months, getting to over half of the users and apps that they're looking to support. And again, roughly 4 user groups and app types. So you can see this progression kind of through this timeline as folks kind of expand, starting small and then accelerating to the point Michael made earlier, after they've maybe gotten some wins, gotten a comfort level, and then start to kind of bite off bigger chunks of the project agenda. So we'll get into some specifics now, and starting, we had asked a question in the survey around who, or do you envision kind of being the riskiest users in your organization? And these were some of the responses. So developers or IT admins that have privileged access to systems, different types of third parties, either those that are on unmanaged devices or those on managed devices, and then employees on unmanaged devices. And all these were kind of deemed by a strong percentage of respondents as risky user groups. And so we want to understand, where in the process organizations would cover them. So in the initial rollout, the most common user group covered was developers or IT admins with privileged system access. There was some variance across industries and across geographies, across some of these different areas that we'll kind of roll through. In this case, among digital native organizations, contractors on managed devices was actually the the number one response. So it could be just based on kind of different business models, those organizations being younger, maybe using more contract help than other organizations, things like that, viewing it as a more priority area. But overall, it was developers for the broad responding group. During the expansion phase, it was employees on unmanaged devices, which we saw was about 50% of the user base. So that makes sense. And then third parties or contractors on unmanaged devices was the top response in the advancement phase. And again, we'll stress this as we go, but this isn't to say this is where you should focus, but just understanding what other organizations are doing to spur some thoughts around where it may make sense for your organization. So as user types, another way to think about this is what's the overall project focus? Are you going to focus on specific types of applications? Are you going to focus on specific use cases? We talked about M&A earlier. Third-party access could be a use case. There can be, a broader project to, move towards a SASE or SSE implementation by unifying ZTNA, SWG, and CASB, and then, really fully replacing a VPN and having that be, really the core driver for the project. So, where in the progression are folks focusing on each of these? During the initial rollout, somewhat surprising, SaaS apps was at the top of the list and followed closely by private apps. I think there may have been some confusion there. I've seen this a lot where, we say SaaS and some folks just interpret that as cloud. So some respondents may have meant that as just general cloud apps as opposed to truly public SaaS applications like Salesforce or something like that. Could also be thinking about tool convergence and some of the overlap between SWG and CASB and so on. But basically, the common thread was an app focus during initial rollout, more focused on specific use cases during the expansion phase, and then moving towards a full VPN replacement in that final phase 3, which makes sense, right? Based on what we saw from your responses as well as in the survey, that's going to take some time. There's very few who are actually there, so it's not really something that you're going to bite off in that first phase, even if it's on your radar and what you're working towards. That's something you would really focus on more in phase 3. From a kind of industry perspective, there was more focus on that unification phase or focus in the initial rollout phase. One of the thoughts there was, from a traditional organization perspective, so older orgs that weren't born in the cloud and so on, they may be more likely to have fewer cloud tools. Maybe they haven't gone through that security tool migration towards the cloud. So they are thinking more about kind of upfront about how those tools work together as part of the SASE or SSE implementation. So it's more forefront. But I think for most, again, there's going to be more focus on apps or use cases at the start, and then you build from there. So capabilities is another way to look at this. As I mentioned this earlier, when ZTNA first came on the scene, which was kind of pre-pandemic, there actually, anecdotally from conversations I had, there was less focus on zero trust and more focus on the fact that these tools were cloud delivered and offered more scalability than VPNs. And then over time, those kind of early adopters were adding capabilities and taking more advantage of the zero trust capabilities. And even if folks are maybe thinking about zero trust earlier in the process now, they're still going through a bit of a phased approach in terms of applying these capabilities and getting more granular policies in place over time. So we've broken this out across 2 types of organizations, digital native orgs and public sector, just to show some differences. So among digital natives during the initial rollout, implementing MFA or multi-factor authentication at the top of the list, followed by device posture checks and making sure that the device is healthy, firewalls turned on, all that kind of good stuff. For public sectors, public sector organizations, device posture checks was number 1, followed by geolocation and time of day. So that all makes sense. It's kind of baseline. As you moved into the expansion phase, now you're focusing a little more on advanced capabilities like DLP and data security, which we do see a lot of organizations want to take more advantage of, implementing more data-centric security policies, so incorporating the context of what users are accessing rather than just them from a data perspective rather than just the app that they're accessing or where they are and so on. And then during advancement, kind of rounding out some of those capabilities, obviously making sure you have device posture checks and so on, getting into UEBA for more risk-based policies that rises up the list a little bit. That can still be more of an advanced capability. So not shocking that it's maybe not number one, but it certainly becomes more prominent as you go through this journey.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of organizations, they see the things on that slide and they probably say, well, I want to do all of it and protect all the users, all the apps, adopt all the capabilities at some point. But I think with real life, it's kind of a prioritization exercise. Got to start somewhere. So this is another one of our largest ZTNA customers, Delivery Hero, which is a food delivery service, operates out of Germany, but it operates in dozens of countries across Europe, Asia, Latin America, some others. For those in the US, pretty similar to DoorDash. And leading up to the pandemic, they had been experiencing a lot of rapid growth. They had around 10,000 employees, and then suddenly it was 20 and 30 and 40, and a lot more contractors joining. There was some acquisitions they did. So they were growing like crazy, and they just wanted a clean slate of adopt a really modern security architecture, do it the right way across all their employees, contractors, developers, security and risk teams, kind of didn't matter who they were. They have lots of customer and vendor data, so there was lots to protect. They wanted to, not delay any longer in that zero trust journey. So they, as you might expect, started with agentless for their web apps. I like this quote around protecting an app takes just about 5 minutes. So they were doing identity-based checks for their internal web apps is where they started for that easy deployment. And then MFA was really important to them as well, which I think aligns with the survey results. Of course, MFA is important as just a very generally accepted thing. But one nuance that I think is cool about ZTNA as an aggregation layer is some of your older legacy resources, if they're from 20 or 30 years ago, those things might not natively support the best FIDO2 compliant hard keys or more modern forms of MFA. So ZTNA as a proxy or as an aggregation layer can kind of sit in between and actually expand the reach of MFA even farther, which I think is a nice side benefit as well. So anyway, over time, Delivery Hero, they started with some of these priorities, but over time, we're able to scale to over 40,000 of their employees and access across all different kinds of apps, regardless if it was private, SaaS, or maybe even some non-web resources like SSH. Along the way, VPN replacement's a very cross-functional thing, so that means the implementation and the buy-in is very cross-functional, but that also means that the benefits and all of the outcomes are as well. So on the security side, they of course had a better security posture that they were proud of at the architectural level, consolidated some of their policy management on the operational side. And then on the networking or connectivity side, smoother onboarding for all those new employees and contractors, and just overall better experiences, better performance for end users. So it's a decently cross-functional effort, but there's a lot of cross-functional benefit when you get to the other side. So John, I think we have a couple more takeaways from the survey or results.
Just rounding things out with app types and then user groups. So I think this maps to the second poll question that we had, from an app perspective, where is your focus, and what I referenced earlier. So I think among this group, file storage and sharing was number one, IT ops was number two, then ERP and communication collaboration, again among our webinar viewers. Among our research participants, those were all kind of top five, but you can see ERP and communication and collaboration at the top of the list. So pretty generally in line, but again, it's going to vary. Again, public sector orgs, you can see the note at the bottom, we're more focused on project management, which for the broader audience was further down the list. So it's where's your sensitive data, what apps you use most, considerations like that are going to drive what you act on first. During the expansion phase, we saw emphasis on CRM, financial management, DevOps, and dev and collaboration tools. And then again, there's some kind of catch up among organizations, maybe that didn't focus on communication and collaboration early on. During advancement, they're going to add that. Same thing with DevOps and so on. But across all these, you can see a lot of movement. Nothing stays at the bottom. So most organizations are going to consider, all of these apps at least at some stage of the journey. And then finally, from a employee group perspective, again, mentioned during initial rollout sales, IT and C-suite, at the top of the list during the initial rollout. During expansion, more focus on legal and compliance teams, manufacturing, marketing, R&D, and then broadening out to the security organization, finance and accounting, IT, app dev, and software dev. Again, very similar to the app group findings, a lot of movement across these different phases. For the most part, kind of no user group left at the bottom and really ignored through the process. Everyone's getting attention at some point, just a matter of prioritization.
Awesome. So as you might imagine, at Cloudflare, we have helped a lot of customers with VPN replacement. It's one of the most common starting points for a zero trust journey that we've seen. But just a little context of how this fits in for us. VPN replacement, it's just one of the top use cases or problems that Cloudflare is in a pretty great position to solve. The central problem, we think, is really this issue of sprawl, of too many just IT security point solutions trying to solve various problems. And in this context, even ZTNA, if adopted in a silo, would be just kind of yet another point solution that adds to complexity, and it's just one more thing to think about in your overall stack. So at Cloudflare, that's essentially what our connectivity cloud aims to help with. Central mission to regain control over some of that chaos, some of that sprawl, and consolidate a lot of these functions. ZTNA is just one of them onto our global cloud network. So that means whether it's access control, threat defense, data protection, connectivity, whether it's for public or private resources, trying to do all of this on an underlying architecture where the order doesn't matter. And that's kind of key of what we saw thematically in the survey too, is that there's no perfect answer of the order to do things in. I think that's a really important tenet of any project, is be agile enough to adapt for that change over time. And that's really central to how this network of ours is architected, to be composable or flexible, kind of fit any org's needs, and especially as those things might change over time. These days, of course, the folks listening might know it's one of the largest and highest performing networks in the industry, but also key to know that all these services, including ZTNA, they're built to run everywhere that Cloudflare operates, well over 300 locations at this point, and everything's available to all customers by default. So not jumping into specifics, but that is not necessarily the case for some of those other large security clouds out there. What happened is, as we built out our Zero Trust platform, considering our history in application services and things at layer 7, agentless ZTNA is actually where we got started with our own Zero Trust journey, and as we developed our own solution, and we're even customer zero of our own project. We started building our ZTNA to help our own developers access their tools way back in 2015, actually. And so in proofs of concept with some of our solutions, we kind of witnessed that aha moment that customers have sometimes, where they maybe came to us and they assumed that they were going to deploy an agent for this thing, and that's how this needed to get started. They realized that there's actually a good amount of users and apps across their web apps or in-browser SSH, whatever it is, that an agentless implementation can help with. And as we saw, it just kind of helps simplify the setup and make sure that there's some quick wins to then start championing across the org and get a bit more momentum around the overall implementation. So that's what we've seen over and over, that whether it's agentless or the breadth of our connectivity cloud or the way that our network is built, being more resilient or better, faster user experience on the other side, a lot of our core connectivity cloud attributes are some of the best reasons that organizations are going with Cloudflare for their VPN replacement. And it probably looks overall like this, where we are finding our starting point. Maybe we thought through, similar to John's survey results, what are the top apps, the top capabilities, the top users, where are we starting? Bonus points if we can start with agentless to make sure that gets off the ground faster. And then we're testing, we're getting off the ground, we're getting buy-in at kind of the beginning stages of that Zero Trust project. And maybe that expands over time to the eventual agent-based capabilities or more inline services, or maybe automating more of it to take it further. So a couple takeaways that you'd have for our audience, John, based on everything we've talked about.
Yeah, and maybe before I do, just a reminder, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A widget. So we'll have some time to get to those, so feel free to input those as we wrap up here. So I mentioned this, but I think it's definitely worth repeating. That upfront due diligence can really pay dividends down the road. And again, it's a mix of understanding, short-term priorities and longer-term goals, and making sure that, whatever you're doing over that first 8, 12, 16-month period is going to fit with your longer-term view. A big part of that, comes down to understanding the vendors that you're going to work with, because understanding where you want to go can help assess the capabilities that they have and how that fits in to your longer range plan. Whether that's the ability to deliver ZTNA as part of a fully baked SSE or SASE solution, technology ecosystem to support a broader zero trust project, whatever the case may be. By doing that planning up front and really understanding where you want to go, put yourself in a better position to succeed over the long term. And then, the research that we did, really one of the most compelling findings was that broad agreement on how agentless solutions can help. So it can help build quick wins. It can help alleviate some of that user friction that we do hear about more broadly from a zero trust perspective, and in terms of inhibiting, momentum. There's a number of ways that it can help organizations move forward, and so prioritizing solutions that offer that, can really help generate consensus in the organization to keep things moving forward, potentially get you budget allocated towards a project and things of that nature. So really, really critical.
Cool. And I think if you are interested in just getting the even longer version and all the explanation around everything we discussed today, definitely feel free to download the full report. This QR code will take you right there as well. It should be also in the sidebar of the webinar. We'll kind of leave the slide here as we see what other questions are coming in the chat. So that's kind of the end of our prepared content today. We'd love to just take a few questions if you think of anything. I think I'll kick it off as Mark keep rolling in here, though, with John, just from being familiar with the market already, as you dove into this research, all things considered, just was there anything that surprised you when the results were getting tabulated?
One of the last points I made, that consensus on agentless, it can be hard to get so many folks to agree that strongly with something, but there was almost universal agreement that type of approach helps. I also thought going in that there would be maybe a little more consistency across some of those phases where, yes, everyone's going to want to address kind of everything at some point, but as a starting point, a particular app, particular user group kind of standing out. And obviously, as we kind of walked through, it didn't work that way. And as you step back and you think about it, you really do understand, the differences that organizations have in terms of not only their priorities, the application footprint they have, but the resources they can bring to bear, the budget that they have, and so on. So there's a lot of considerations, and it made more sense after the fact. But I think going in, I expected things to shake out a little bit differently.
Well, I see one that I want to just address quickly. We talked about agentless a lot. So question is just any downsides to agentless, or is agent-based, better in certain ways? And I think just like many things, it depends. What are you trying to get done? I think overall, the trend is agentless is probably capable of more than it gets credit for sometimes. So again, great fit for unmanaged devices or contractors in particular, where by definition, things are not managed or within corporate control a lot of the time. And then really good fit for web apps. This is basically is connecting a public host name to our app connector to oversimplify it of how this thing is working. And so anything web apps or in-browser SSH is a good fit. Places where then you start expanding to an agent-based approach are getting into more private network capabilities, or adding some of our more advanced device posture integrations and risk scoring, location awareness for detecting if someone's in the office versus remote, and does that affect the policy they get. So there's some capabilities where then the agent starts to become necessary, but a lot you can get done. Again, web apps, contractors, unmanaged, even adding some of our clientless capabilities for other inline services within SSE, like clientless browser isolation or layer 7 DLP policies running inline for some of our layer 7 web apps. So a little more than initially meets the eye. I just want to make sure that folks know that. But yeah, I think maybe just one last one on John, overall at the beginning. I know I said a quarter of folks said they actually did not plan to move away from their VPN, but I can't help wonder of what other interpretations might be there of maybe, is that thinking that full replacement was going to happen on a shorter time scale than was realistic, or like we said at the beginning, that some orgs might not reach 100% replacement. Any other takeaways on what do you think the true number might be for, in the long term, folks looking to move away from that VPN?
It's hard to say for a number, but if we did this again in a year or a little over a year, I think it would be under 20%. I mean, I think from a marketing perspective, we've just started to see that VPN replacement story really discussed, I think, because it's a mix of technology and users kind of being ready to think about it that way, but that doesn't mean everybody is. So it's still new. So I think users have been kind of conditioned about coexistence, as you referenced, earlier for a while. And some of it is just, we've seen this in other studies we've done. As things change, it can be difficult to kind of visualize, what that new stage is going to look like. VPNs have been around forever. Can I really see the day when my organization doesn't have it at all? So, I think there's going to be cases where organizations, keep them 5+ years down the road. But I think that number shrinks even over the next 12 or 18 months, just from a kind of a research perspective, as more folks get a comfort level with ZTNA being able to fulfill the vast majority of their secure access needs.
Yeah, totally fair on the timing point. I think that's a really good point. If we ran this again in 2 years, maybe our split would be a little different. And I think things along the way, like learning through surveys like this, hey, what is everyone else doing? Folks love examples, getting ideas from what other orgs are doing, the users they're starting with, the apps, the top capabilities. We're all kind of collectively learning from each other. Try to make this zero trust journey thing a little more specific. Let's get into the data. Let's make it real. And so speaking of that, as we close out here, if you want to download any of those other resources, we have the full ESG report for all the results we walked through today. A couple other resources from Cloudflare too, including an implementation guide, where if you're really interested and really want to dig in, you could also just grab our free tier of our zero trust platform and dig into that implementation guide and give it a try, alongside some other resources like our zero trust roadmap, which aims to accomplish kind of a similar thing of where are the most common starting points and in what order might you consider all the other projects along the way. So that's all we had. John, again, thanks so much, first of all, for doing this research with us and especially joining us today to walk through the results. Had a lot of fun.
Yep.
And thanks everyone for joining and watching. Feel free to send the recording to a colleague if you think they might benefit from it. And that's all we have. So we'll see you for the next one. Thanks a lot.
So there you have it, a little research in the spotlight today. We want to thank Michael, John, Cloudflare, and Enterprise Strategy Group for that report, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.